Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Old Weird Books channel. This series is going to endeavor to highlight books that I have found or been given that are older and falling apart and potentially out of print, so that we can look into them and see what we were learning 50, 100 years ago that no one's talking about anymore. And just to kind of look at the condition and maybe find a gem built in here or there. Today's first book is called Poems and Stories for School and Home by Stephensen. It's book 2, grades 5, 6, 7, and 8, and it was produced for the Lincoln School Supply Company. So this particular book, I already know the cover is barely hanging on, so I'm going to be very gentle with it today. I will be looking into getting some archival paper and finding the best way to preserve this, because these are, at least this one, is very fragile. So as I go ahead and I turn the cover here, very gently, there's a piece of tape in here labeling this 1930. Don't know how accurate that is. And you can see the paper is very brittle. So as we open it up to the title page, we do have a picture of George Washington. And then again, it tells us the name of the book. We've got a print maker here that says LSSO, and then I can't read whatever the dots are below that. They're just too tiny. Published by the Lincoln School Supply Company at 1008 Q Street in Lincoln, Nebraska. I missed a page. So we've got our copyright here that says 1930 Lincoln School Supply Company in Lincoln, Nebraska. And our contents page is a little different than normal. This one has 5th grade, page 1, 6th grade on page 49, 7th grade on page 105, 8th grade on page 133, an index to selections on 167, and an index to authors on 170. And then the preface. The preface here says, a number of years ago, the Departments of Public Instruction in many states, in order to unify and better organize the teaching efforts of the grade school, particularly the rural schools, established a state course of study. In the English outlines of these courses were references to many splendid poems and stories. It was soon discovered, however, that few schools had library facilities sufficient to make possible carrying out this part of the courses. To remedy this situation, the publisher was urged by many teachers, and particularly city and county superintendents, to compile and publish all required poems and stories called for by state courses of study in a single volume. As a result, the first edition of Poems and Stories was published 5 years ago. This first edition met with such satisfactory response and rendered such a worthwhile service, we felt impelled to make many decided improvements in this new edition. We have included much new material, so much in fact that it has been necessary to put it out in 2 volumes instead of 1 as formerly. Book 1 includes poems and stories illustrated in colors for the first 4 grades. Book 2 for grades 5 through 8. Where the old edition carries no illustrations, our new edition is illustrated in colors, and it is double indexed. You will find the material arranged alphabetically by authors and alphabetically by subjects. After the subject is specified, the grade. We have made the books better in every way, and now are glad to offer them with the hope that they will give a bigger and better services. Sam C. Stephensen. Next up, we have the dedication page, which says, "To the grade school teachers who have done so much in training the youth of the nation, we wish to dedicate this book." And then we have a quote. "I will read and study to prepare myself, for some day my chance will come." Abraham Lincoln. So today I'll go through the first story here, and then I'll make the next story into its own video. So Poems and Stories, 5th grade. How the Chipmunk Got His Side Stripes. Long, long ago, in the days when the Indians roamed happily through the great forests, they came to be very closely associated with the animals that lived there. They had all kinds of pretty stories about these woods folk, which they thought of much as like brothers. Among the quaintest of these tales is the one telling how the chipmunk came to have black stripes running down its sides. Ever so long ago, even before the chipmunk got his stripes, the animals of the forest got together and decided to have tribes and chiefs, just like their brothers, the red men. When it came to deciding upon the head chief, every tribe of animals began clamoring to have the chief chosen from its number. The bears insisted on having a bear to head the great clan of the woodland. The rabbits were quite as sure that the chief should be chosen from their number. While the argument was going on, the porcupines got their heads together and decided that one of their number should have the much coveted position. So while the rest of the animals were wrangling, the chief of the porcupines walked quietly up and possessed himself of the fallen tree trunk seat reserved for the great chief of all the animals. When the rest of the forest folk saw what had happened, they were very angry and tried to chase the usurper off his throne. But nothing they could do helped any, since none of the animals could get near enough to hurt him on account of his prickly quills. There was nothing to do but accept him as the chief, which they reluctantly did. By and by, however, Head Chief Porcupine had a very difficult problem to solve. Some of his subjects, like the owl, the bear, and the bat, wanted it to be night all the time. The others, like the squirrel, the birds, and the deer, thought that the earth should always have daylight. Finally, to settle the matter, Chief Porcupine caused to be built a great soaring campfire, which was a signal to all the woods folks that a council was to be held in the heart of the great forest. The animals that lived in the trees saw the great blaze and hurried to the council, and those that lived in holes and dens heard the great crackling and started running towards it. Hurrying and scurrying, the woods folks came from all directions and seated themselves around the great campfire. When all had arrived, the great Chief Porcupine arose, looking very fierce with his quills glimmering in the firelight. All the animals saw how worried he looked, and they knew some weighty matter must be upon his head. After a bit, he broke the tense silence by saying, "Shall we always have day? Shall we always have night?" These questions trouble me. I cannot decide. I cannot decide. You must help me in this matter. Then all the woods folk began giving their opinions at once. Each tried to talk louder than his neighbor, and such a mighty clamor arose that Chief Porcupine could scarcely hear himself think. He certainly could not hear what his various subjects were trying to tell him. In fact, he could not understand a single animal except the bear, whose voice was so big and deep that it could be heard above all the other noise. Over and over again, the bear kept saying, "Always night, always night, always night." The bear kept this up so long that finally a little chipmunk sitting nearby piped out in his squeaky voice, "I don't care what you say. I don't care a bit what you say. Day will come back anyway. Day will come back anyway." Now the big bear did not at all fancy having a little creature like the chipmunk contradict him, so he stopped clamoring for night long enough to tell the chipmunk to stop doing so. Then he began once more to growl with all his might. Always night, always night, always night. Whereupon the wee chipmunk, going a little further away from the bear, squeaked out in a defiant voice, "Light will come back, light will come back." Just then the wee chipmunk saw the rosy light breaking across the hills, and hopping around excitedly, shouted at the top of his voice, "I don't care what the bear says. The light is coming back. Look off to the hills and see for yourselves." The animals, seeing that all their talking did not change the matter of day and night in the least, quieted down enough for Chief Porcupine's voice to at last be heard. In deep, impressive tone, he announced he had made his decision, and that hereafter there should be day and night, just as had been heretofore, in order that all of his subjects might be pleased at least part of the time. While the other animals loudly applauded the wisdom of the great chief, the bear and the chipmunk simply sat looking daggers at each other. Then suddenly the bear made a quiet dash after his little tormentor, and sent him scurrying through the forest. The chipmunk spying a hole in the tree, slipped into it just in time to save his life, but not quickly enough to keep the paw of the big bear from striking him on the side. And that is how the chipmunk got his side stripes, which he and his descendants have worn ever since the day of the great council of the animals, when the chief porcupine decided that it was best for all concerned to have both day and night. By Alice Crowell Hoffman. Thank you for listening to the entire story. As I mentioned, the next story will be in its own short video. Please stay tuned, and I hope to see you then. Thank you.